What's going on, everybody? We are back. We got episode number 105 of the Club and Sub podcast. This week we're talking about UFC 278, a okay pay-per-view card. Some might say it's not worth the $75 it's going to cost to order, but nonetheless, there is going to be violence in a cage, and there are betting odds. So we are here talking about it. As usually got me, John at MMA Fox, Luke at SWR underscore betting, and Lags at Danny underscore Lags. And guys, for $1,000 bonus up to your first deposit on Bet Online, use the promo code Club Sub. And yeah, guys, I guess we'll get into it right away here. I mean, Luke, what are your thoughts broadly on the card? Anything in particular stand out?
Honestly, it's not a pay-per-view card, in my opinion. Obviously, the top half of fights, obviously Aldo, Costa, Usman, all good stuff. But overall, I think it's more of like a fight night card in totality.
Yeah, Lags, how about you?
Yeah, I'm more in agreement with that as well. And as far as the betting lines go, there are a ton of chalky favorites that we'll get into that they're more or less, I don't know, some of them trustworthy, but I don't know, a lot of them just not so much.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing is, it's a lot of times we see these low level cards with a lot of finishes. And I mean, there are some spots like that on here, but there's also a lot of low level fights that are very unlikely to finish and provide, great entertainment, which is kind of I'm all for them having absolute dog shit on here, but at least make it fun dog shit,
Right.
So I mean, so with that, we'll get right into the dog shit here. We got Victor Altamirano. He's taking on Daniel Lacerda, De Silva, whatever you want to call him. Altamirano's line actually coming in now. It's down to minus 150. I actually have some moderate interest. I think the line might keep coming, but I do have some. I think we're echoing. I think I do have some moderate interest in the Altamirano side. I mean, I faded De Silva in his first fight against, I believe it was Jeff Molina. I passed on the last fight where he got finished quick. But I mean, basically, look, what you see is what you get with this guy. He's going to, at least so far, he's shown he's going to come out really hot. He's got the potential to put you in a lot of danger very early in the fight. He's kind of a slick submission grappler, has some power, but he basically just dumps everything into, his first surge. And if he doesn't get you out of there, he's probably going to gas out pretty badly. And with that dynamic, I kind of like Altamirano. First of all, the guy's shown he's pretty durable. He rolls punches okay. I do think, despite kind of a janky game, that he is the more technically skilled fighter. And ultimately, I think Altamirano's got fairly good jiu-jitsu and isn't very likely to get subbed. And so it's one of these things where if he's not likely to get finished early, and I don't believe he is, then he's got to be more than 60% here, one would think. And I guess you could say, wait for a live bet. My problem with that is that De Silva tends to come out so hot that it's it could be 3 minutes until his cardio starts deteriorating here. And then suddenly he either loses the round or it's so clear you don't have anything on the live line or it's worse going into round two. And conversely, if De Silva comes out more at a slow tempo than he has in the past, I don't think he can win a point fighting fight kind of match with Victor Altamirano. So I like the Altamirano side. I'm probably going to play him, but I'm kind of waiting on this line a bit. Lags, what do you think?
Talking about low level shit though, I think at least this will be pretty fun. At least I think it should be an entertaining scrap for as long as it lasts. But I think kind of look at what you were talking to. De Silva really has one round in him. I think that's kind of where all of his win equity lies. So I think Altamirano is super live to outpace him both standing and in the grappling later this fight goes. So don't hate it as long as his line's coming in.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you as well. I guess I didn't see that the line has dipped so much in Altamirano, so I'm kind of with you in that stance. I guess I didn't have much interest in him when he was around minus 200, but now that it's starting to come in, I think I'm starting to gain some interest. I did take some early shares on the under 2.5 when it was evens on Bet Online, more so just because obviously Altamirano not the craziest finisher in the world, but he is a brown belt, I believe, in jiu-jitsu. He will be aggressive in attacking. He's going to throw a lot of strikes, but it's more so just on the De Silva side, who's kind of your killer be killed archetype. I think he's only gotten out of the first round twice in his whole career. So just kind of playing more into that general dynamic with the under 2.5 at like a pick just didn't make a lot of sense to me. Obviously, it's like close to minus 200 now. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm leaning with it too. But yeah, if the price keeps coming in, I think Altamirano's a decent look, because I actually do think he's reasonably tough. I mean, I think the only guy to finish him was Brooks, who's still a pretty strong wrestler, and it took him a second to do it. So yeah, I think Altamirano is probably the side. If you like De Silva, I don't know why you wouldn't just play inside the distance.
Yeah, what do you guys think of where the under is now? Because like I looked to play it today, and I didn't realize we were all the way out to minus 190 with it. And that I'm kind of torn, because I do think De Silva's probably going to try to force a finish as hard as he can. And so there's a part of me that thinks it still might be short, but also minus 190 under in a flyweight fight. I don't know. I mean, do you guys think there's still meat on the bone there?
So I was looking at it when it was like minus 150, and Altamirano, like the money line was like minus 200, and I had like somewhat interest in it. And now that it's kind of like ballooned out, I don't have like a ton of interest personally.
Yeah, fair. Anyway, moving on. We have an interesting fight here. We got Aori Quinlan. I don't really know how to pronounce this. He's taking on Jay Perrin. This line's actually come in quite a bit. Quinlan opened like minus 300 or something, which kind of crazy. He's down to minus 135 now, though, which is kind of interesting. Lads, what do you think about this fight?
So I think it is Arichi Lang.
Okay.
Oh.
Oops.
Nice. You're good. No, I understand like the early movers here on the Perrin side. Like I think I like his relentless, like come forward grappling pace, but at the same time, like the dude's kind of hittable on the feet. Like he just looks in general like uncomfortable on the feet. And in general, his like takedown defense is kind of suspect, I think, too. Like I think Arichi can have some wrestling success too. Like I just don't have a ton of confidence in the Perrin side here. So to me, it's more like a pass.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, it's a fight I don't really have a passionate take on personally. I think it should be a pretty fun fight. Both guys are going to swing. Both guys have shown the ability to attempt takedowns. I think Perrin is interesting, and I kind of understand why people are coming in on him, because I do think his cardio is probably better than Quinlan's in a higher paced fight. But I think Quinlan's the bigger guy. He's the bigger hitter. I think his optics are probably a bit better. And I think he's probably more alive to just go out there and win the first 2 rounds. I was hoping we were going to get a better number on the over, but it's like over minus 200. And I'm like, fuck that. And what's probably going to be, a relatively chaotic fight. But I just think both guys in general are pretty tough, despite their defensive issues. They're 2 tough dudes. So I understand people coming in on Perrin. I guess I would probably just more look to him live if I was to play him after one personally. But I think I'll lean to Quinlan kind of, around the 55-ish% mark is probably fair.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of weird. Like, had I taped this when those Perrin early numbers out of like plus 200 were there, plus 170, I probably would have played Perrin. I guess I'm with you that the line's probably right where it is. I don't really rate Perrin that much. He's a decent striker, but he doesn't have much defense. He's a decent submission grappler, but I don't think he's much of a wrestler. And Quinlan, I think, is an okay wrestler, but kind of a nothing submission grappler. He's probably a below average technical striker, but he hits really hard. I guess for me, the dynamic is just kind of, it's probably 50-50 on the feet with an edge to Quinlan on power. What really concerns me and why I can't really get on board with a Perrin dog number where it currently is I got big time noodle vibes from him against Mario Batista. Like, he's just so easy to kind of like tip over if you lock up with him in the clinch. Like, I don't think he's very strong from what I've seen. And I kind of think, I mean, we know Quinlan comes from a wrestling background in China originally. And I don't think he's a good wrestler, but I think he's strong and physical. Obviously, the guy's fought at 135 pounds. He's likely strong enough that, if he does have issues on the feet, he can probably go to the takedowns, clinch up, and just kind of control the fight there. Obviously, I don't think Quinlan is near, the skill level of a Mario Batista, but also the takedowns Batista was getting it wasn't like he was doing anything particularly tricky or sophisticated. So, yeah, I honestly think the line could maybe be even a little wider than where it is right now. Like I kept Quinlan around minus 150, but I mean, with that said, unless this like tank to evens, I'm not really looking to play Quinlan, and I think the early numbers on Perrin were probably fine. Moving on, we got Amir Albazi taking on Francisco Figueredo. Luke, any thoughts here?
I think it's a pretty decent spot for Albazi. I've just never been a Figueredo supporter. The guy's got the nickname of the sniper, but I don't think he's knocked anybody out at distance in his whole career, which is kind of funny. Like he is long. He's got some good intangibles. He's got some quick hands. The problem is there's just no sense of urgency with his game. I think at least on average, the guy attempts the fewest distance strikes on this entire card per minute. Like he's just not willing to be consistent and be active. And as noted, he's not going out there and starching people. It's like, so to be low volume and not really have extensive power capabilities at 125, pretty big red flag there. He is a big 125 though. He's shown some offensive wrestling competency. You know, he kind of wrestle fucked Jerome Rivera, but I think we learned pretty quickly that Jerome Rivera wasn't a UFC caliber fighter and was bounced out of the promotion in less than 12 months. So take that for what you will. But then he went out there and got out wrestled by Malcolm Gordon, who I don't think is very good either. He also cardio dumped in that fight. Him knee barring Da Silva early is kind of meaningless because it looks like Da Silva has never trained leg lock defense in his whole life with how easy that came. So I just don't think the guy's very good, to be honest, where I think Albazi's a promising prospect. My issue with him is in the past, I think his striking defense still needs a lot of work personally. But I do think he has leveled up, like going back to his last fight against Jumagulov. You can say what you want about Jumagulov, but guy, you know, fringe top 20 type of guy or whatever, he went out there and beat him. And we know over the years in watching Jumagulov, despite his record, he's just not like an easy guy to look good against minute to minute against pretty much anybody. So to go out there and beat at least that caliber of a guy this early on in his UFC run, I think is, you know, pays some credits. I think Albazi's the better wrestler. He's the better grappler. Like I said, my only concern is if he gets clipped. I don't think that's not really predictive. The other concern is that if he just kind of like plays guard like he did in the third round against Shorty Torres, which is ultimately what lost him that fight. Because Figueredo, I'm assuming, will come out here and attempt takedowns. So as long as he doesn't sit there and just try to play jiu-jitsu, I like his pace. I like his optics. I think he's just a more skilled fighter with more general upside at 28 years old. So I think it's a good spot for him. Am I laying over minus 500 on it? Still coming off a layoff with how inactive he's been too, with a few of those concerns I touched on, you know, probably not. I think it's just a decent pass spot.
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. Funnily enough, like I didn't tape this till this morning, and I actually might have laid the Albazi minus 300 that was out there had I taped it earlier, just because I actually, like something you touched on, Luke. I don't, you know, not only does Figueredo not pack a ton of power, but he is low volume. And so it kind of minimizes a lot of the risks you would normally have with someone who is minus 300. Obviously, he's not that now, and I'm not playing him now, but I actually think Albazi's pretty good. You know, he does lack defense. He has defensive issues, but I actually like his offensive striking a bit. I like his grappling. He's a decent wrestler. He's obviously a good submission grappler. Plus, he's 28. As you mentioned, he's on a layoff. But I'd expect him to be getting better, whereas, you know, the younger Fig is 32, which is, I mean, it's not young. It's not old at flyweight, but it's not young either. You know, I think there's really not much chance of Francisco Figueredo making much improvements. And so it's like he's at a cardio deficit, a power deficit, a grappling deficit. Albazi pretty much checks every box here. Again, I'm not laying minus 500, but I do think the early numbers on him were good. I don't really have any interest on a total because like it wouldn't shock me if Albazi just lays on him or controls him from top position for 3 rounds, and it also wouldn't shock me if he cuts through him and finishes him. So I don't really have the best view on that. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna say the only thing that you touched. So lastly, to touch on there was just that his cardio is really shit. To be honest with you, like I think. Yeah, he's got a little bit of power, but it's like round 1 or bust, to be completely honest. Like, again, the volume's low. Takedown defense in general is not great. I think Albazi has a clear grappling path, and he's a better striker here, to be honest, either. So, I mean, it's just one of those favorites that kind of just ballooned out, to be honest. And in terms of the total, though, I do think it does go under 2.5 rounds, though.
Yeah, fair. Moving on, we have an interesting fight here. AJ the Ghost Fletcher. He's taking on Lusa. I I haven't decided if I'm going to play Fletcher here. I think my big concern with AJ Fletcher is, we saw it in his last fight when he got extended, he gassed. But I think it's less a cardio problem than Fletcher tends to just redline very, very early. He used a lot of explosive energy for about 8.5 minutes before he started to slow down against Hamelsberger. I actually kind of think if he learns how to manage his gas tank, he probably will be fine. And I do think he has like a relatively high ceiling in the UFC. He is a very good athlete. He's obviously an improving grappler, and he's a very willing grappler, which is something you want to see. Hits pretty hard. I think his striking, I mean, it's not the most technical thing I've ever seen, but I think it's effective, and I don't think he's necessarily a punching bag. And on the other side, you have Lusa, and I don't know, man. I see people try to make the case for Angelusa every time the guy fights, and I just don't get it. I don't think he's very good. He does this thing where I don't know if he's just bad at measuring distance or he's afraid to commit to his strikes, but you've seen him a lot as his competition's gotten better. Him just kind of come up short on his shots. Like he'll throw from too far out, and then he'll end up just sitting in the pocket without, doing anything. He'll just almost admire his work that didn't ever exist and then get hit for it. I just don't really like his approach to striking. I know he's tried to grapple in the past. I don't think he's a great wrestler. I don't think he's a great submission grappler. Obviously, he has some pop, and I do think he could hurt Fletcher here, maybe take over if Fletcher gasses. But I don't know. Like, I just don't really think Lusa is anything special at all. I had originally looked to the over, but it's at like minus 200 now. And for the way Fletcher is going to redline his tank, I just don't really want to pay that price on an over. But I do lean Fletcher here. If the line comes in more, I might play him. I think he's the more skilled fighter. I think Fletcher is the far better athlete and has very likely a lot more improvement upside on him too. So I think Fletcher's probably the side. I don't know if I'll bet him or not, but I'm considering it. What do you think, Lex?
Yes, I'm kind of where it's like I think Fletcher could look like a good bet in hindsight, but like where I'm at now, kind of like what you touched on, it's just the cardio is really an issue for me. Like in terms of the striking, I think he has all of the finishing upside. To be honest, I think he has a durability edge, and if anybody's going to have grappling success here, it's likely to be him. But it just really comes down to cardio for me, so it's a pass.
Luke, how about you?
I've actually faded Lusa successfully twice. I bet Madalena at like evens against him on the Contender Series, which I enjoyed. And then I laid the wood with Lazez against him as well. And there's for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, there's a lot of parts of his game I just don't think are completely refined yet. But honestly, I'm a little bit on the other side of you from the Fletcher perspective. And I'm kind of on an island with this opinion. I I don't know if AJ Fletcher has a high ceiling in the UFC. I'm not convinced yet. I do think like from what we've seen, he appears to be pretty well rounded. At least in this matchup, I do think he's probably the better overall mixed martial artist. But like, I mean, his career is just on the basis of completely crushing cans, pretty much essentially, and just running through guys. So it's really hard for me to like benchmark his skill set against UFC caliber fighters. That's the thing with like Lusa. Like, I think his best attributes are that he's just kind of a good athlete. Like he's pretty big, he's explosive, but the problem is like his pacing has been kind of inconsistent. Like even in the fights with Madalena and Lazez, I mean, he still landed a lot of strikes. It was just he was facing two much better technical, higher volume strikers, so he just also is one step behind. But then we saw like earlier in his career where he would just go like completely aggro and just go out there and kill guys. And so we've seen him wrestle sometime, look good from top position. Sometimes I think his takedown defense is pretty good though, which is why I do have some interest actually in him here. If Fletcher comes out here, wrestles early, and Lusa doesn't just tip over from TDAs, because I don't think he will, and Fletcher gasses, I think Lusa could potentially take over the fight, but his work rate obviously has to be up and it has to be high. But it's not a fight that I really have a strong opinion on. But I guess I'm kind of on the other side where you put a gun to my head, I would rather take the shot on Lusa, but I would want a much better number personally.
Yeah, fair. Moving on, we got Miranda Maverick. She's taking on Shanna Young. Lags, what are your thoughts here?
So I was originally going into this thinking I was going to have a poke on Young, to be completely honest with you, but I just think that the margins for her win or her winning this fight are just so small. Like I think personally the Maverick has like decent wrestling, but I just don't think it's all that great. But not that it needs to be here. And so it's just kind of where I think that Maverick probably finishes her later in this fight. I don't think Young's cardio is that great. Don't think her pacing's that great. So I think Maverick ITD is probably not a bad look if you're on the Maverick side.
We got you.
Yeah, I just kind of think it's a levels fight. No hot take for me. I think Maverick's better than her in every single area of MMA. Like, I don't think we really need to break down the fight that much. She obviously beat the girl once already 3 years ago. The only thing I'll say is I think if you just like take a step back, you have to understand like what the UFC is doing with this matchup. They fucked up, when they put her against, Barber, where she obviously got robbed, and then gets her ass whooped by Blanchfield. And like, okay, one of our new highly touted prospects is now in a 2-fight skid. We fucked that up in the booking. So what do? They give her Mazo in the next outing. Pretty favorable stylistic matchup. Should she go out there and wrestle? She did. Sends Mazo back to the regional scene, and so now they want to get her back on another win streak. What better way to do that than give her a girl in Young who's on the last fight of her contract, who was only in the UFC by default anyway because she took a short notice fill-in, who Maverick beat already. Like, to me, it's just kind of like a pretty easy like trajectory of what they're trying to do here. So like even in the scenario that Maverick doesn't come out here and wrestle, she's probably not like minus 500, minus 600 standing. That's kind of the concern, but like I still think she's a better striker, and she's gotten much better even in the first since the first fight. The last thing I will say, I've heard a couple of people say on the first fight that Young dropped her. She did not drop her. Miranda Maverick threw a kick, and Young punched her at the same time. She was off balance, so she just fell down. So she did not drop Miranda Maverick. That's just my opinion anyway. So I think Maverick by however she wants. Young gets caught after this.
Yeah, I have like a bunch of money on Maverick minus 350. Not because I have some particular like strong take, but like the whole market moved and FanDuel, as they're wont to do, we're just hanging out there. So I have that, and I'm still deciding whether or not I want to just let that ride or just. I mean, obviously the market's moved so much at this point, I could pretty much take a decent profit on it for free. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't really. Look, is Maverick, I mean, what's the current line implying? About 87%, somewhere in there? Like, is she that high? I don't know. I mean, that's a big number for WMMA, but at the same time, and like, look, I don't put much stock in the first fight. Yeah, and yeah, I agree. I mean, if Maverick decides to stand with her, she's certainly not this price. I still favor her by a decent amount, but it's kind of like one of these things where I think Maverick standing briefly with Jojua like has everybody thinking, oh, Maverick's got bad fight IQ. But like I heard the same shit, before the Sabina Mazo fight, and what did she do? She just went and just worked the girl on the mat. Like I'm kind of expecting that to happen here. I'm looking to fade Maverick down the road. I think, we saw in the Blanchfield fight, she is a poor defensive grappler. I still think she has some like pretty problematic defense on the feet, especially when she fights someone who's decent on the counter. But I just don't, unless she just sits down in the pocket with and brawls with Young, I kind of think she should have her covered everywhere here. Young is not super physically assertive, in my opinion, at least not to the degree Maverick is. And so I favor her a bit on the feed. And I think if she grapples, she's not going to have a hard time with it. She's a much better grappler than Gina Mazzani is. I think she's a much better wrestler than Stephanie Egger is. Again, I don't put much stock in the first fight, but I do think Maverick can pretty much do whatever she wants in the grappling. And just like taking it a step further, Young's 31 years old. She's been around. I don't think she's getting much better. Maverick's 25. Like, this is the age where you'd expect huge jumps fight to fight. It's very hard off of what we saw the first time, what we've seen from Young when she's been grappled, and what we've seen from Maverick, for me to say, oh, this is a competitive fight. It's only really a competitive fight if Maverick makes it that. Sure, she could, but I think she should roll. But again, it's not like the most passionate of takes. I just think Maverick, big favorite, is pretty justified here. Is she 90%, 85%? Probably not, but I think 75, 80% is probably fair. Like, I'd be surprised if she won this less than 3 out of 4, you know? Anyway, moving on, we have Sean Woodson taking on Luis Saldana. Kind of actually, Lags, did you break down Maverick Young? Oh, sorry. You started that. I'm an idiot. Luke, you can take us away. Sean Woodson, Luis Saldana.
Yeah, Woodson's kind of like a guy that I've had like a bit of a love-hate relationship in a lot of ways with. Like, I'm still a really big fan of Sean Woodson. And, the issue with him has always been, kind of what happens if guys, do get him down and because we've seen him get his back taken multiple times. But it's like, I went back and I did a healthy amount of tape on this one. And I just don't see a lot of merit to Saldana. I just don't think he's a very good fighter. I think he's, reasonably technical early. He's quick, he kicks hard, but he has about 7 minutes of cardio, and pretty much guys, when they've decided to go forward or work pressure-based games on him, he significantly struggles. When Jordan Griffin, who's not a great athlete, not a great striker, decided to go forward, hit him clean pretty consistently. When, Austin Lingo decided to, bite the mouthpiece, go forward and swing, went out there and gas Saldana and beat him that way. It's like, I think Sean Woodson is just a really slick boxer. Obviously, the dude's ridiculously big for the division too. I just don't think Saldana has the tools to really go out there and beat Woodson. I did take a shot on Zalal against Woodson at like plus 170, just because I thought he was going to go out there and look to wrestle and grapple. That's what he did, and that's what forced, a close fight. And the thing with Saldana is, though, he just doesn't really wrestle. Like, he might like wrestle occasionally, but I don't think it's very strong. So unless he's able to like, occasionally get Woodson down or get him transitionally or something, I don't see what the merit to him in this fight is. He's not going to win on volume. He's not going to win on optics. Woodson's proven to be incredibly durable to date. His cardio is better. And I know people like look at the Arosa fight and say that Woodson gassed there, but it's like, he took that fight on less than 2 weeks' notice, and it was a super high action fight where both guys landed over 100 significant strikes. It's like Saldana just doesn't have that in his game to push that pace. Coupled with the fact is, with us being in Utah at, 4,000 feet of elevation, if homeboy Saldana is gassing, already 7 minutes into fights to begin with, it's kind of hard to project that his cardio is going to be better at elevation and fighting a guy who's going to come out here and throw a ridiculous amount of volume, who's just much better mechanically and technically. So, yeah, I think it's a great spot for Woodson.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, am I going to bet it? I mean, it's not really my style to bet a minus 300 in a striking fight. But at the same time, I look at the dynamic, and Saldana as a striker is almost like a guy who wants to play the outside game and use his length and distance because he is kind of tall and long for the weight class, except he's not very good at using his length and distance. And he's fighting a guy who's a lot taller and a lot longer than he is. Like, there aren't many of them, but, Woodson's a giant, as everybody knows. And so that's bad for him. Saldana's shown when guys get inside his reach, he just doesn't have much defensively to offer. I mean, Jordan Griffin was literally like a marauder, like running this guy down and just firing wild hooks and hitting him no problem. We saw the same thing for stretches in the Austin Lingo fight. So I don't really think Saldana has much minute upside standing. I think in terms of like KO equity, it's very, very large in the Woodson favor. And so it's like, can he grapple him? Because I still do have, I shouldn't even say questions. I really do think Woodson's going to end up fighting a good grappler at some point who's going to wreck him. Had he ended up fighting Pierce, I think things would have gotten really, really badly for him. But I do think Woodson's first level takedown defense is pretty good. So are, his initial level of get-ups. Like, if he can just kind of grab a whizzer and stand up, he will, and he's pretty good at that. He's going to struggle when he fights somebody who actually knows how to advance position and keep him on the mat. I kind of think he's the kind of guy, once his shoulders touch the mat, he's just not going to have much to offer there. But Saldana's not a very good grappler. He's a bad wrestler, horrible wrestler. I don't think he's a very good submission grappler. And then on top of all that, this fight's being fought at elevation, and Saldana has absolutely atrocious cardio. Like, this is a guy who is gassing in mid-tempo fights without a lot happening, and now he's going to be in a fight where if he wants to even be a little competitive, he's going to have to fight at a very high tempo. I just struggle to see him doing that. I mean, and even in the grappling angle, like, I honestly don't think he's a better wrestler than either Kyle Bochniak or Yusuf Zalal. So, yeah, I'd be surprised if he got him down. I think Woodson pretty much is going to march through him and eventually finish him here. I honestly think Woodson, like, minus 400 is probably right. I kind of think Saldana, either he needs to have massively leveled up his grappling or he needs to land some kind of crazy shit here to beat Woodson. But I honestly think Woodson should be fine. These are the kind of guys that John Woodson should be fighting and having big success against. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, see, I think this is a classic levels fight, in my opinion. Like, we're talking about the Maverick fight, the Young fight. This is my opinion of a classic levels fight. I think that in terms of the striking after the first round here, I mean, Saldana's pace and cardio just really goes off of a cliff. And I'm actually looking, instead of to lay the juice, I'm looking to split a unit on round 2 and then round 3 for Woodson.
Yeah, I don't hate that. I mean, that is when Saldana should slow down here, theoretically. But yeah, I mean, it's a good fight for Woodson. I mean, it's kind of boring that we keep talking about how it's a good fight for all these chalky fighters, but this is what the UFC's left us with, unfortunately. Moving on, we got Lucy Pudilova. She's taking out Wu Yanan. I actually have a bet here.
I was gonna say, John, I was gonna say it's on the main card now.
No. We're still on
right.
Oh, okay. Is it? Well,
it got moved to the main card. Like, this fight got moved to the main card.
All right. Well, we're using Tapology, so it's on the prelims
You're
for
good.
all intents and purposes. We're doing it the way it should be done here. But I have Yanan. I bet her as a dog at plus 125. I think. Would I bet her at minus 104 or even money? I'd be a little less inclined to. I think there still might be some value. I don't know. But I favored making her a small favorite here. I honestly kind of think people go watch Lucy Pudilova tape and watch the fight with Irene Aldana, and they're like, oh my God, Lucy Pudilova is really good. She's going to butcher Wu Yanan. And then just don't contextualize the rest of her career. Like, Irene Aldana, for better or worse, and Aldana is very good, but she's going to stand directly in front of you and swing with you. She's not going to try to move. She's not going to try to make you miss. She trusts her durability. She trusts her combinations, and she trusts her power. And for the Pudilova side, that's like exactly what Lucy Pudilova needs, because the woman cannot grapple. She has no discernible kicking game. She basically just needs someone to stand in front of her and brawl. And if someone does that, she does have a good jab. She does have a 1-2, and she's pretty durable. So I kind of think people look at that fight and they're like, oh, Pudilova, she should be fighting against Wu Yanan. But you look at the rest of her career, every time someone has moved on the outside against her, she's shown tons of difficulty cutting the cage off. She'll just like spam the jab out there. She just doesn't really know what to do if you don't give her like a look in the pocket. You saw the Justine Kish fight. Kish basically danced around the outside against her for that entire fight. She went to 2 split decisions with a 500 fighter in Octagon, where she basically did the same thing and just kind of skirted around the outside, blitzed her here and there, would just get in and out, and Pudilova just didn't really know what to do. And then in the grappling, she just doesn't really have much there. Like, she lost to Talita Bernardo in that, like, there. She's the only woman maybe ever to get out grappled by Antonina Shevchenko in an MMA fight. And I mean, it's just, I don't think Pudilova is good at all. I think she's got a good jab and a good cross, but if you don't let her use those tools, she just doesn't have anything to force the pocket into her preferred range. And on the other side, like, I don't rate Wu Yanan particularly highly, obviously. Like, this woman's on the verge of being cut from the UFC. But the bottom line, she is pretty tough. She throws high volume, throws a ton of strikes, and she does, almost more importantly here, tend to stay on the outside. She uses the outside very well. She darts in and out. And if you let her get off on that game, she can be very effective with it. Her last opponent, Mayra Bueno Silva, that was actually a moderately competitive fight. The big difference between someone like Silva and Pudilova, why I think despite similar physicality, it won't be a similar result, is you saw Silva use kicks, like body kicks and leg kicks, quite a bit to keep her from kind of skirting the outside and force big pocket exchanges. Pudilova just doesn't have those tools. And so I kind of think at distance, Yanan's going to be able to get in and out and just pick her off. And so you're looking at what's probably going to be a pretty close fight striking wise. Pudilova, I don't believe, has a KO in her career. I just don't think that's a very likely outcome. And then if you talk about the grappling, Yanan attempts takedowns every fight. She actually looked pretty good on top of Buenosova, who is pretty dangerous from guard. She's the only fighter in this matchup that has grappling upside. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not in love with betting Wu Yanan ever because she has almost no physicality. She doesn't hit hard, zero finishing upside, but I think she matches up very, very well with Pudilova here. So I have 1 unit bet on her. I think she should be a small favorite. Lags, what do you think?
Nothing too strong for me. I just kind of think it's kind of coin flippy standing. And like you touched on there, if anybody's going to have any grappling success, it's likely to be Wu. But I think this is pretty low level shit, to be completely honest with you. And now it's on the main card on top of that.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Legs. I'm really trying to stay away from shit like this. I'm just, it's unless there's like a massive number next to one girl, but like, I hear your point, and honestly, if I gun to my head, if I was to bet it, I probably would bet Wu for the higher grappling upside. But it's like, I don't know, man. I would want a bigger number personally. Pass.
Yeah, fair. Well, more Wu. Moving on, we got Jared Gordon. He's taking on Leonardo Santos, who's coming off being submitted by Clay Guida. Lags, what are your thoughts there?
I think this is one of the favorites, and we'll touch on another one that is actually like not that trustworthy. I just think at least fresh, Santos is going to be a tough guy to grapple, and the guy hits hard on the feet. I think this is just an ultimately a competitive fight. Like I know a lot of people were saying like, oh, Santos is just round one or bust. I think the guy's got like decent cardio. I think there's just a lot of hindsight bias from the Guida fight where he just kind of redlined for the finish. I mean, he basically got Guida out of there. Most refs would have stopped it there. So I have a small bet here on Santos plus 225. I just think it's fairly competitive, and Gordon can't grapple him fresh, at least in my opinion.
Luke, how about you?
I get it. I mean, I go gun to my head from a pre-fight standpoint. It would be Santos, but I've been firm in this stance for years now. I am not betting Brazilians over 40 years old. I'm sorry. I don't care. I don't care. I'm not doing it. I lose money. I lose money when I do it. I'm not doing it. So what my strategy personally is for this is to look to live bet Gordon after round one. That's how I'm looking to go about it. But yeah, I understand it from the Santos side. You know, he's going to be at a massive size advantage. He's, a pretty sharp striker. He's got power. We know Gordon's still, his durability, in my opinion, is still questionable because, obviously he hasn't been knocked out in his last 4 fights, but he hasn't really fought any good strikers either too, which I think needs to be noted. But I don't trust the cardio of Santos, and I don't trust the pacing of Santos either. And I think Gordon's pretty reliable to go out there and do things. I think his cardio is better in this fight. So even if Gordon isn't able to land takedowns easy, I do think that pressure and pace will get to Santos over the course of the fight if he doesn't get him out early. So I honestly, I wouldn't even hate like a flyer on Santos in round one, but I'm looking to bet Gordon live after the first.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add. Like, I do think if you're betting a money line, it's very clearly Santos. Like 5 years ago, this is a very easy play on Leonardo Santos here. Obviously, I think we'd all probably agree he's the more skilled fighter. He's obviously the better jiu-jitsu player of the two. Probably not, definitely not the better wrestler, but certainly the stronger fighter and certainly the better striker. Look, I'm not going to rehash the cardio stuff. We all know what it is. Santos he only has a couple bursts of fight in him. If he can kind of measure that cardio well, then he can win fights. Like, we're 2 fights removed from him basically being in a very competitive fight until being finished with 2 seconds left against Grant Dawson. And I guess theoretically that could happen here, but I think Gordon's going to be a bit more willing to strike with him than Dawson is. He just tends to be in general. Plus, I think Gordon will get bullied in the clinch by Santos much more so than Dawson would be. And so if Gordon's going to come forward striking, like I've always been a big Jared Gordon guy. I think the guy's been perpetually. It's funny because I feel like he's always undervalued by the market, and then after that 4-fight winning streak or 3-fight winning streak, his last 2 fights he's being massively overvalued. When Gordon like brawls with people, he is there to be cracked. Like that, I honestly am not even sure it's a durability issue, which has gotten him knocked out so much as a Jared Gordon hangs his chin in the air when he's swinging in the pocket with guys and has a tendency for getting hurt. And so I think Santos is going to have decent upside early in this fight. It's really just a question of can he maintain it down the stretch? And if Gordon attacks him with the same amount of volume that he normally does, the answer is probably no. But the other side of that is Santos's power might be enough to deter Gordon from being as aggro as he usually is. And if that's the case, like maybe Santos can hang on down the stretch here and pull out a decision. Clay Guida is almost like too stupid for his own good. And even when he's like close to death, is still coming at him like a wild animal. That is not, most guys are not like that. Like you see this all the time when these pace guys will fight somebody who hits a lot harder. Suddenly they're not pace guys anymore. We'll see if Gordon is, but I do have a feeling he's going to get hurt early in this fight if he does come at him hard. I sort of think he's going to try to approach it the same way that Dawson did, and I kind of think if he does that, it's likely a close fight. But I'm kind of with Luke in that 42 years old and looks like he does not look like he's getting better, that's for sure. It looks like his game's deteriorating. It's really like Santos could be value or he's hindsight plus 1,000, like I don't really know. I don't mind the shot though. I've been thinking about it myself, and I might do what you guys both suggested and just play him early and then look to get out live. We'll see what happens, but I could only bet Santos here on the money line. Moving on though, we have I guess you could call it. I mean, this fight's going to be over fast in all likelihood. We have Tyson Pedro. He's taking on Harry Hunsucker. Luke, what do you think of this fight?
Hunsucker, livest dog on the card. No, I'm just fucking. The one thing I will say, though, he is going down to 205. We don't know what he looks like at 205. He was always an undersized dude, adds just another little potential sprinkle of variance. But, I mean, he's fucking terrible. Like, he just shouldn't be on the roster. It's another setup fight for Tyson Pedro. But it's obviously an incredibly difficult fight, really, if you're looking to bet it. Because, I mean, don't parlay Tyson Pedro at -800, -900. You're getting no value off your parlay there. His inside the distance line is like -600, -700. His round one prop is like -250. That's the one thing I will say. If there's you can do whatever the fuck you want to do, but don't play him round one, honestly, at 250. I think that's fucking stupid considering we saw him just damn near almost go to the second round with like Villanueva. He was incredibly low paced. And essentially, hurt him with kicks. So I don't know. Mr. Hunsucker, I was just curious and listening to an interview. He said he's pretty adamant that this fight is going to get out of the first round, which I think is kind of interesting. But no, I mean, obviously Pedro is incredibly live to nuke him. My thing is everything is so inflated towards Pedro, and probably honestly for good reason, but there's just no value on this fight, anywhere, in my opinion. Like the under 1.5 is -400. Like fuck that.
I was hoping that was going to be a decent number, but yeah.
Yeah, everything's just gotten absolutely smoked. Yeah. Like if I was to do anything, let me pull it up here quick. What's Pedro by sub at +300 is what I would take a shot on.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really. There's nothing really much else to say. I've always liked Tyson Pedro. I've been a fan, and I feel like in a lot of respects he's been his own worst enemy. But I think he's a relatively talented guy. If he ever put it together, he could be a ranked fighter at 205 for sure. He certainly has the athleticism in the game for it. And Harry Hunsucker is horrible. Jonah Shippey had mentioned earlier in a Discord that we're in that he said, sometimes people talk about prices like this with regards to the under and they think they're crazy, but sometimes, the skill gap between a mid-tier light heavyweight and someone who's several tiers below the UFC is big enough they're justified. And I kind of feel that way. Look, the reality is Tyson Pedro is probably a top 15 talent at 205. Harry Hunsucker is nowhere near UFC caliber. Could he always come out here, blitz Pedro, and kill him? I guess that is a possible outcome, especially since Pedro's had a weird tendency of like suffering injuries and whatnot in fights. But I mean, Pedro's going to have no issue with him. The thing is, I would be tempted to just blindly play an over 1.5 at plus 300 because how the fuck can 7.5 minutes be plus 300? Except Harry Hunsucker is not going to sit back. That's not what he does. He goes sprinting into the fire and then he either kills somebody, dies, or quits. Like, that's what happens. That's who he is, you know? So it's like, I know what Harry Hunsucker is, and I know he is not an overs fighter under any condition. Like, could it get there? Yes. Do I think it gets there more than 25% of the time? No, I don't really. So it's a pass for me. Pedro should womp. What do you think, Legs? You're muted.
So I was going to tell you there. So the starts round 2 is plus 200 if you're interested in that.
Fuck that.
But
I'd rather go to distance.
But no, I mean, it's funny you were mentioning that Luke. He says in an interview he's going to go to round 2, where all 12 of his professional fights have ended in the first round. Honestly, it's like I think Pedro kills him in the first round. I don't think there's any value anywhere, totals or any prop at all, really.
He fought Bandera, right? Hunsucker on Contenders?
Yes. Yes.
Didn't he fight well early in that fight and then just randomly get mounted and finished? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he looked decent for like the first.
No.
He looked good for like the first 2 or so minutes. He was landing on Bandera.
Yeah. So I don't know. I have no interest. I'm not there. I mean, there aren't many spots on this card, but there are certainly better spots than any bet on this fight, in my opinion. Moving on, though, we have a great one here. Marcin Tybura, he's taking on Alexander Romanov. I bet the over. I'm going to bet Tybura. Romanov's probably better than I gave him credit for in the early parts of his career. I still think he's very sloppy, but he's a good wrestler. He knows how to use, his size, and he's dangerous on top. And like being a good wrestler at heavyweight is a cheat code. But the reality is he's mostly outside of the Espino fight where, I mean, he flat out quit. Let's be honest. That low blow was not bad at all. He's been given literally probably the 4 worst grapplers in the entire division to just kind of feast on. And he has done that. But I question what happens when he gets into a dogfight after what we saw with the Espino fight. What happens when he can't hold the guy down? Because I'll tell you what his striking is like. It's awful. He's a minus striker, like a big minus striker. You saw in the DeLima fight, DeLima was hitting him pretty much at will early in that fight. Even Espino, who's a minus striker, was touching him up on the feet without really too much problem. And so the question is still there. What happens if he can't just dominate a fight? And can he dominate Marcin Tybura? I suppose it's possible, but I actually think Tybura's get-up game off bottom is like pretty elite for heavyweights. He knows what he's doing down there. Of all the times I've seen him get taken down, I've never seen him be controlled. Like, I think the longest I saw him get controlled was like 1.5 minutes by Werdum, and that was like championship level Fabricio Werdum, like one of the best submission grapplers ever, and he only held him down for about 1.5 minutes. And so, given that he struggled to control Espino and DeLima on the mat, I'd be surprised. Like, I won't be surprised at takedowns. I think Romanov will get takedowns here, but I'd be surprised if we have any situation that is Romanov ends up on top for 4 minutes. I think Tybura is going to be able to work up here. I also think he's going to be able to stuff some takedowns, which I think is another interesting wrinkle here because, first of all, I think one of the things that's benefited Romanov throughout the entirety of his career is how big a 265er he was. Guy cuts weight to 265, knew how to use that weight in the clinch. Well, his last fight, he was 236. You could see he was very trimmed down. And while that might give him a better gas tank here, I'm pretty sure when it comes to just kind of bodying someone in the clinch, it's going to hurt his ability to do that, especially against a good clinch fighter like Tybura. And the other thing is, he's not really a clinch striker, Romanov. He tends to just kind of hold guys there, look for the takedown, throw the occasional knee to the thigh, whereas Tybura actually is a very active clinch striker. And so I kind of think while Romanov's not on top of him, he's going to be losing most minutes here, even if he's the one doing the cage pushing. And I think Tybura, if he gets on top of Romanov, could have pretty significant success himself here. And so ultimately, look, I think Tybura, I don't think Tybura has more trusted cardio. He's gone 5 rounds before, whereas Romanov death gas the only time he went into the 3rd round in his career. He's the much better striker. I think he's unlikely to get control on bottom. So with that dynamic, I love the over because I don't think that Romanov finishes him on the mat. And I like Tybura here. I think it's very, very hard to put Romanov past like 60%. You want to give him 60% because, oh, he's huge and good at wrestling? Okay. But I think putting him past that with the other dynamics in this fight is crazy. So I'll be betting Tybura as well. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, to me, it's kind of like how big of a favorite do you think Romanov is to finish Tybura on the mat in the 1st round? Because I think the big thing being ignored is like it's not like Romanov on the feet is just like nuking these guys. Like most of these guys he's finishing are on the mat. It's either ground and pound or finding a submission. So it's like you have to, again, like we touched on, you kind of have to cap a huge favor for him to do that in the 1st round, which I just don't think so. Like the cardio is just really not there. If he doesn't do it, I don't think he's going to have any extended wrestling success because we're fighting at elevation and just the cardio dynamic in general. So I have a pretty decent bet on Tybura, unit and a half at plus 300.
Luke?
Yeah, I mean, I really fucked this up, and I played Tybura at plus 275, and legitimately within like 3 hours, he was like up to like 350, 360 on some books. It's honestly one of the biggest botch lines I think I've had of the entire year, because I was looking at it, I'm like, okay, plus 275. People have to have went back and watched the Cispino fight. The market is going to come in on Tybura. And then these fucking idiots just start parlaying Roman, like the entire market just starts parlaying Romanov 3 hours later. I'm like, what the fuck are, like, what are people watching here? Like, I just don't get it. Like, I'm not going to run through everything you said, John, because I think you broke the fight down well, but like, that's really all it comes down to me. Like, he's went out there, you watch the guys he's fought in the regionals, absolute bums, absolute cans, horrible fighters, bad strikers, bad grapplers. He's looked like a superstar. His W's in the UFC, really not impressive, as you touched on, John. Guys who can't grapple at all. So the guy looks like a world beater. The one guy he fights that can wrestle and can grapple, he gets tired and quits. Like, that's the sample we have of his career. And he's taken on a guy in Tybura with 82% takedown defense who's been fighting nothing but top 15 guys for the large bulk of his career, who's actually a black belt in jiu-jitsu as well, who's, like you said, reasonably difficult to control on the mat. So it's like, I know that's like a pretty surface high-level breakdown to it, but it's like, that's kind of like really all there is to say. I think Tybura's the better striker too. So in that dynamic, how is somebody minus 400 in that fight? Let alone factoring in that this is heavyweight, just more variance in the general division to begin with. We are at elevation too. First fight that went to the 3rd round for Romanov, he gasses. It's like, I don't get it. I think the over's a good look as well, John.
Yeah, agreed. Moving on. Yeah.
Real quick, what is kind of interesting though is like why the over 1.5 is juiced given the dynamic with Romanov, like, and like his fights in general, like going under and whatnot. I don't know. I just find that kind of interesting, like how Romanov can be as big of a favorite as it is, and with the over being where it's at.
Well, yeah, it doesn't really make much sense. I mean, you have to imagine if it goes into the 3rd round, Tybura is definitely not plus 300 here, you know? Moving on, we have a great fight here. We got Jose Aldo taking on the machine, Merab Dvalishvili. Lads, what do you think of this fight?
Well, Merab is my boy, but I won't have a bet on this fight, to be honest. 'Cause I think this is a huge level jump up for him in general. And to me, I just think this is a tough test. I think he can get the pressure and get his wrestling going. And to me, Merab's pressure and his grappling in general is just on another level that I just don't think Aldo is ready for. Like, I know historically on paper, he does have good takedown defense. He's got the good leg kicks as well. I think they'll be there early, but like, I just think Merab, once he gets it going, it's just going to be tough to stop. I think if this goes 15 minutes, it's tough not to like Merab. And Merab decision only is minus 175. So.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, this is kind of like the MMA gambling Twitter war of the week. Everyone's either very passionate on Aldo or very passionate on Merab. Not for me. I really want nothing to do with this fight. I think it's pretty high level fight, really interesting stylistic matchup. But after doing tape on it, I just come away with a ridiculous amount of questions, to be honest. I think there's significant merit to both guys. I lean more so to the Merab side to potentially, take over and just kind of break him. But I don't know that for sure because I think he's also going to be getting stung with counter shots. I don't think it's going to be easy for him to land takedowns. If he can't easily land takedowns, judges are scoring damage. So even if he's like getting cage push, I don't know. I think a lean to Merab on the money line is fair, but massive pass for me.
Yeah, so I think Merab's going to run him, to be honest. I have like 2.5 units on Merab at like minus 125. Look, I love Aldo, and I certainly wouldn't be betting Merab against peak Aldo or 145-pound Aldo. Obviously, I think Aldo at his apex had a lot of tools necessary to deal with this. But the truth is, over the last 5 years, he just hasn't really been the same guy, which isn't to say he hasn't been good. Obviously, he's got some, good wins over that period of time. But in particular, there's a couple things that stand out. Look, I mean, Aldo was never the best minute winner. He relied very, very heavily on his counters to, kind of shut down volume against him and deal damage. I don't know if it's just that he's just not delivering as much power at 135 pounds, but for whatever reason, more guys than ever are getting volume off against him. He's struggling on minutes with just about everybody he fights outside of Pedro Munoz. And if you really want to contextualize the Munoz fight, I mean, Munoz pretty much stood in front of him for 3 rounds, and an inaccurate striker who's very hittable and whose best strike is a leg kick against a guy who checks every leg kicks and is an elite counter striker. It was pretty much an ideal matchup for Aldo, like Munoz was there. So I'm not saying it wasn't impressive. It was extremely impressive. Like, obviously, he dominated that fight, landed 113 significant strikes across that fight. But again, I think context is important. If you want to contextualize the rest of his bantamweight career, I think the best look he's had is the Peter Yan fight, where he looked great for about 2 rounds and then slowed down precipitously. And that fight was not fought at pace. He lost the decision to Marlon Moraes. He got taken down by Marlon Moraes and briefly controlled in the clinch. He lost standing minutes to Marlon Vera and got controlled in the clinch for almost a round of that fight in total time. Look, Marlon Vera I've always underrated him, but the truth is no one can say with a straight face that the guy's a good minute winner. That should have been a layup for Aldo, and it wasn't. And even going back before that, look, I don't take anything away from him for losing to Volk. Volk's probably the best featherweight ever at this point, but Volk controlled him for a round on the fence, and he really didn't do anything to disengage. Font took him down, got in his hips relatively easily, was able to get to the back clinch pretty easily. He just he's not stopping entries the way he used to, and when guys do get in on him, he is doing a really poor job of disengaging. That was never the case in the past, but it has been the case over the last 4 or 5 years or so, and it's certainly been the case at bantamweight. And when you layer on top of that he's getting older, he's shown he can't fight at pace, and he's not really hurting guys at bantamweight at all. I don't think he's actually hurt, other than Font. Rob Font, he hurt a bunch, and that looked great when it happened. But then, obviously, look at Font's last fight. You wonder just how washed is Font, right, when you saw that fight. And plus, if you look at the whole Font fight, Font outlanded him almost 2-1 in that fight. I bet Aldo in that fight, and I thought it was the worst he'd ever looked. And so now you flip to the Merab side here, and look, do I think Merab's going to outdistance him? No. I mean, if Merab stays at distance with Aldo, he's probably fucked here. Like, he could land like a Mimi shot that knocks him out, I suppose, but it's extremely unlikely. But I do think Merab's going to be able to get inside on him, and I think he's going to be able to easier than people think. Aldo, obviously, for his career is known as kind of having incredible footwork and a great stick and move game, but we haven't seen that out of him in years, him kind of do that, jab and step off kind of game. And so I think Merab will get inside, and I think the assumption that Merab is going to struggle badly to control Aldo in the clinch, because that's where Aldo's had huge success throughout his career, just isn't very realistic. You look at the guys who controlled him in the clinch: Volk, Font, Vera, Moraes, even briefly. Volk's one of the best featherweights ever, but he's not a great clinch grappler. He's an okay clinch grappler. Merab is arguably the best clinch grappler in the sport outside of maybe Usman in the main event. He's extremely hard to get off you once he gets his hands locked there. He throws a ton of strikes from those positions. I mean, this is a guy who's landed over 200 total strikes in a fight 5 times, I believe, across his career thus far. And so Aldo is going to have to in my opinion, one, demonstrate an ability to disengage from the clinch that he hasn't displayed in years. Number two, show a level of cardio that he hasn't shown in years, because Merab is going to bring a pace to him. If you want to look at the closest comparison, it's the Dodson fight. And obviously Aldo's better than Dodson, but also Dodson has way better cardio than Aldo has. And Merab was able to force a pace in that fight. Merab was able to force a pace against Ricky Simone and get his game going. And I think Simone's maybe the best defensive grappler in the sport when it comes to sheer takedown defense and disengaging from the clinch. So I'm pretty sure he's going to get inside on Aldo here and get his arms wrapped around him and get a ton of control and land a ton of strikes in the clinch. And so the question becomes, well, can Aldo do enough damage in between those moments to win the fight? And sure he can, but Merab is very, very durable. I certainly don't favor him to do it. And beyond that, can he knock him out? And again, he can. But like I said, Aldo isn't really hurting outside of the Font fight. He isn't hurting anybody badly at bantamweight. And so I don't know. I don't think it's going to spend much time at distance. I think Merab's going to get inside very, very, very fast. And I think he's going to struggle to disengage. Maybe Aldo has a good first round. But even the first round, if Merab gets into the clinch here, I think he has a very good chance to win that as well. And I kind of think the pace is pretty much a lock to wear on him. And even the takes about Merab not being able to get top time, pretty much every time, it hasn't happened often in his career, but lately when he's ended up on his back with his shoulders on the mat, he hasn't gotten up. He's kind of played guard and accepted it. And so I think Merab's going to have a lot more grappling success than people think. And I think and the line is indicating that we're getting the Jose Aldo of 5 years ago, when the reality is we're getting the Jose Aldo from his last 7 fights, which in my mind is a guy who should be a decent-sized dog to Merab. Even the Aldo no scorecards takes or the Aldo ITD fights, yeah, I guess I favor him to win ITD, but it's if this fight takes place in the clinch for 8 minutes, do you really think Aldo's more likely to finish ITD, or does he end up getting gassed out and finish down the stretch? I don't know. I think Merab should be around -200 here personally. I think on minutes he's going to dominate this fight. Aldo could obviously hurt him a couple times and win a decision that way or knock him out. I just don't really think it's as high a percentage outcome as the market. But then again, I'm the biggest Merab dick rider there is. I think he's eventually going to run into a wall when he fights someone like Peter Yan, who can actually counter wrestle effectively. But I don't think Aldo really has that ability to counter wrestle in that manner anymore. So yeah, I'm on Merab for 2.5 units. I think he's going to roll here, but we'll see. I do understand the Aldo arguments. I just think he's a lot further gone than what people realize. Moving on though, we have the main event of the evening. We got Kamaru Usman taking on Leon Edwards. Usman's at about minus.
Hey, John,
yeah.
Co-main event.
Oh shit! Well, I forgot about that. We have the co-main event of the evening. We have Paulo Costa taking on Luke Rockhold. Luke, what do you think here?
Yeah, I think Rockhold's washed. I don't think that's a hot take by anybody. X's and O's wise, there are aspects of Rockhold's game that could technically give Costa issues. I know Costa stuffs takedowns at 80%, but good Rockhold is a pretty good wrestler. He's a pretty good grappler. He's got a pretty good top game. We've seen Costa give his back to stand on a couple occasions. So I think Rockhold could have some sneaky back take potential, but he kind of needs more of an outside range tempered game. And I don't think that's the game that Costa is going to give to him. He's pretty much given it to nobody outside of Izzy, where he just fought pretty much scared and got picked apart and finished, but pretty antithetical to his whole career. And when guys blitz Rockhold, it just does not look good. There's just times when Rockhold, outside of even in those blitzes, where his general defense just gets incredibly lazy. And I think it's a pretty poor tendency to have, coupled with the fact that Rockhold's going to turn 38 in October. The guy's talking about how he's going to win a championship. I think he's fucking delusional and shit. And where in your last breakdown, John, about you saying how you're a big Merab dick rider, I fucking hate Luke Rockhold. He is my most hated fighter on the roster. So there's maybe a little ever so bit of personal bias here, but no, I genuinely do. I think the guy's done. I think he's screwed on optics. I think he's screwed on pace. He's screwed on durability. It's not going to be easy to take Paulo down. Obviously, there's been some cardio concerns with Paulo in the past, but I think he's going to be fine. In a 3-round fight here. So yeah, I think Costa kills him in the first couple of rounds. Not a hot take.
Yeah, I bet Costa at like minus 255 here. I think the line's trending towards being right now. Honestly, it's funny because like even peak Rockhold was great if he got on top of you, and obviously he has that punishing body kick and like a decent jab and right hook. But even like against peak Rockhold, I'm not sure I'd favor him against Costa just because on the feet, Rockhold really needs space to operate to get his striking game going because he has had, it's funny because I kind of think people just assumed his chin went, but the truth is he had poor defensive tendencies his entire career. He just kind of fought fights where he didn't get punished for them. And the guys who then did start going forward on him did punish it. And so he was always kind of reliant on keeping guys on the outside or getting on top of them. Look, Rockhold gets on top of people. He's got one of the most punishing top games in the history of the sport. There's no denying that. But he's a terrible wrestler. He always has been. He hasn't gotten better. It's funny because I remember people talking about Jan's takedown defense and referencing the Rockhold fight before he fought Glover and being like, the fuck are you guys talking about? Like, it's like, Luke Rockhold is not Glover Teixeira. He's just not a very good wrestler. He's one of these guys who, like, he'll go in for the double leg and then just kind of gets there and then just doesn't know what to do. He kind of hopes you fall over. And if you don't, he just doesn't really have a lot to do there. So, which isn't to say he couldn't get a takedown here, right? He could. But anyway, my point was peak Rockhold, I think this would be a bad matchup for him. Now you couple that with the fact that, look, his career clearly started going south, a few years ago. Took some time off, came back at 205. Jan fight happens, gets knocked out. Now it's been 3 years. He's 37 years old. He's coming back down to 185 pounds here. After, if you recall, before he fought Romero, he had a horrible weight cut. I remember there was an interview with, I want to say Olivi, where he just sounded like, literally like he was like talking to people that weren't there just because his weight cut had been so bad. So he goes up to 205, gets knocked out, and now he's coming back down at 37 years old. That doesn't seem like a great thing. Can his game still hold up here at this level? Maybe. But like I think it's a very safe assumption that Rockhold was declining in his last 3 fights, before this extended layoff. And I think it's an equally safe assumption that Rockhold is likely declined further past that point. So this was a bad matchup in the beginning a couple years ago. Now he's 37. He's coming back down a weight class. Hasn't fought in 3 years. Depending on whether you believe Michael Bisping or not, he may not be taking his training super seriously. We don't really know. And he's fighting Paulo Costa, who, look, people give Costa a lot of shit, and obviously the Izzy fight was a bad look. But the guy's really good. I mean, the reality is he's a pressure fighter and he's a volume fighter. He's been fighting. His last 3 fights have all been against top 5 guys. Obviously got finished by Izzy, but he beat Romero in a wild fight. He, honestly, without the point deduction, you could make a really coherent argument for him beating Vettori, who literally just fought for the title. And so, like, I just trust the level that Costa's at a lot more, coupled with the fact that I think Costa, I know Costa's going to pressure him. I know if Costa gets inside on Rockhold, he's very, very likely to hurt him there. And so the real question to me really comes down to, can Rockhold get on top of him? And it's like, sure, he could, but one, Costa's got very good takedown defense. We saw Vettori try a number of times, and Vettori's a better wrestler in terms of takedowns than Rockhold is, and he only was able to get him down once. And two, I'd expect Rockhold's top game to be as punishing as ever. Like, grappling tends to be the last thing to go. But Costa's get-ups, I don't really love them, like the way technically what he does, but he is very explosive getting up. And so even if Rockhold gets him down, he's likely going to have to get to his back very, very quickly. And if he doesn't, Costa's likely back up. And even, let's just say he gets takedown and rides him out for a round. Like, can you really project Rockhold? I have a hard time projecting him to land a takedown. Like, but sure, he could land a takedown here. Can you really project him to land more than a takedown? And if the answer is no, then what does a Rockhold win look like? You know, Costa does what he did in the Izzy fight and just lets Rockhold kick him and jab him from the outside. I guess that could happen, but you know, Izzy's got probably the best ring craft in the division, and that is such a huge outlier from Costa's career, especially even with last fight, that I just don't really see it. I think he goes forward. I think he's going to hurt Rockhold. I think he's probably going to finish him. Yes, peak Rockhold could have won this fight. He could still win this fight. I just look at the fight, and it's like, I really struggle to see Rockhold winning this more than, you know, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 times, to be honest. It could happen, but I think it was a bad matchup from the beginning for Rockhold. You add in the fact that Costa's 30 and should be improving. Rockhold's 37 off a layoff and was declining anyway. I think this is a tailor-made matchup for Paolo. What do you think, Legs?
Yeah, not too much of a hot take for me. I think Paolo probably kills him pretty early. I have 2 units on the fight doesn't start round 3 minus 175. I think it covers a lot of bases, but yeah, I largely think Costa kills him in the first round, to be completely honest. Luke's chin cannot handle it.
Yeah, I don't think under is a horrible look, to be honest. Like,
and that's the thing. Like, I know somebody mentioned me earlier, like, why not just play the under 1.5? Personally, for most part, I just hate playing under 1.5, so I just hate it. But yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think Costa took him more than 1.5 to finish Johnny Hendricks Corp, so maybe it'll take him longer than that to finish Rockhold, or vice versa for Rockhold to finish him. But yeah, I mean, I like Costa. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, right? But I think this is a pretty good matchup for him. Moving on, we got Kamaru Usman taking on Leon Edwards. I mean, there's a lot that could be said, but I mean, I feel like I say this every time I talk about Usman. I think basically he's the best welterweight in the world by a fair margin. You know, people can complain about his technical skills all they want. The guy's super durable. He throws a ton of output. He hits hard as fuck. He's a great grappler. He has absolutely elite cardio. That's a tough combo to beat. Could Edwards do it? I guess, but like my thing with Edwards has always been, I don't think he's mid. Like I think Edwards is a very solid fighter at everything. Like that's what I call him. He's very good at everything, great at nothing. But he's very low volume. He's not a huge hitter. He's at a grappling disadvantage here. So to me, it's like he needs basically an ideal fight to outpoint Usman here. And I know there's some narrative about, Usman's fallen in love with his striking, but it's like, actually look at it. It's like the 2 fights with Covington where the wrestling wasn't really on the table. You have the Masvidal fight the first time where he just grappled him to death for 5 rounds. You have the second fight where he actually took him down twice before he knocked him out. And you have the Burns fight. Burns is an elite jiu-jitsu player, and obviously he wasn't going to grapple him there. So I don't really think that holds up. And let's just say hypothetically it does. If he ever feels uncomfortable on the feet here, he's going to be able to go to the wrestling fairly easily. The reality is, look, Leon's very good. The guy almost got finished by Brian Barberina. He went to a split decision with Gunnar Nelson. He got outlanded to the head by Nate Diaz over 5 rounds, even though he dominated that fight. But he did get outlanded. And if he gets outlanded by Usman, he's going to be taking a lot more damage. And he almost got finished late in that fight by Nate Diaz. Leon's very good, but I think Usman, you can say what you want about his technical ability, but his attributes are great. And he's basically a machine built to win fights in this UFC meta. I think the line at minus 400 to minus 500 is about right. I kind of think Leon needs to knock him out, and I think the chances of that happening are pretty low. Leon winning a decision would require him winning in the clinch or Usman just accepting a low-paced outside kickboxing match, and I just struggle to see either of those things happening. Lags, what do you think?
Yeah, not too much to add from me. I just don't give him too much of a path either, just because, like, I don't think the wrestling path is on the table. Like you touched on, the low volume nature of Leon in general. So he kind of does need to knock him out, to be honest. Like, to be honest, I don't see much of a path. I think Usman is, like, much just higher just in terms of, like, the gap from him and Colby to all the other guys, personally.
Luke, how about you?
Yeah, I think you guys hit on all the main points. I think probably Edwards is relying on a knockout. What I will say, though, I think it is possible just because we haven't seen Usman knocked out before. He's been hurt in multiple fights, so it's not like we've never seen, his durability tested at all. I think Edwards is the better technical striker. I don't think many people would disagree with that. Obviously, Usman's stand-up has leveled up massively since their first fight in 2015, in which he still actually had a healthy amount of striking success of his own. Obviously, his power is translated much more, but that's kind of my thing with what you touched on too early, John, was like, even if he is standing and, there's things aren't going well, it's like he just has that cage push clinch option, the wrestling control option. Like, it's just, he can kind of just dictate and really make this fight either easy or a little bit more difficult than it needs to be, which is ultimately why I'm not like clamoring to play minus 400 on Usman. But like on the other side, I like contradict myself because I'm also of your opinion too, that I think it's like Usman and then everybody else. Like, that's kind of my general opinion. I thought if there was going to be a guy to go out there and do it, it would have been Colby. Obviously, we have 2 fights to suggest that was not the case. But I do think Edwards is live to clip him if Usman decides to go out here and stand for 60 to 70% of this fight. I think that would be stupid, in my opinion. But if, there have been fights where he's looked to stand extended. To your point, though, it's made more sense in those fights, like against Colby, who's obviously, an elite wrestler, or like the Burnses and Mize and, those type of guys. It just makes more sense. But he did stand a lot with Masvidal in the second fight too. Obviously killed him. I get it, but I'm just saying. But yeah, I think, Usman, I think 80% is probably right.
I think the big thing for me is like I had a bet on Leon over Nate to finish him like inside the distance at like plus 170, and like that's just a rough look in general to me. So it's like, if he can't finish Nate or even really come close to hurting Nate, in my opinion, it's like, is he really going to get Usman out of there, man?
I mean, honestly, I if the line were to come back to like the minus 325, 330 range, I'd probably lay it with Usman if I'm being honest. But yeah, I don't disagree, Luke. I mean, look, he can get a little reckless in the pocket. My big problem is like, do you trust Leon if he does hurt Usman to like kind of follow up? Like, I almost feel like he's too content to like play his game to either the positive way or the negative way, regardless of what comes to him. Like, I could easily see him hurting Usman and then just kind of letting Usman recover,
Entirely possible as well. I'm not, like I said, Edwards has kind of had a really weird career because, like, from a betting perspective, I'm not a huge fan of his overall game. He's one of those guys that wins, though. But yeah, obviously, there's only one way I could go, and it would be, Usman. Otherwise, I would just be playing Edwards because he's fucked on minutes here, most likely.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Usman's going to retain it. I think it's probably going to be a pretty boring fight. But even like, I thought about the over, but even the over, it's like, well, let's say Usman does decide. Like, let's say the thesis about Leon winning is Usman does decide to let his hands go. If Usman pushes a pace, like a 400 significant strike attempt pace, it's probably not going over one way or another, So I can't even really be passionate about that. So
I was just looking on FanDuel. The only like another way you could play an alternate way is the 4-5 decision. That's minus 155.
But people said that about the Masvidal fight, and then he just turned his lights out in the second round. Like, it's weird because I kind of think for years everybody was like, Usman just relies on cardio. He doesn't hit hard because he just wrestled people. And then as soon as he started letting his hands go, it was like, oh, fuck, the guy actually does hit really hard. So, yeah, I don't know. I'd play him if we got a better number, but I'm not really interested here, and I think Usman's going to roll. Anyway, guys, thanks for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it. If you like the show, please drop a like and subscribe. Would really help us out. We have a break next week, and then we come back to an absolutely horrendous UFC Paris card that we get to break down. But yeah, good luck on your bets this weekend. As usual, you got me, John. You can find me on Twitter at MMA Fox. You can find Luke there at SWR_betting and Lags at Danny_Lags. Thanks for coming out, guys. Good luck on your bets this weekend. Follow or fade.